Hello and welcome to this program in a box on ethics. My name is Robin Mueller. I've been a NAIFA member since 1979 and speaking professionally on ethics and suitability since 1996. We're going to present this ethics course in three different parts. Hour one will simply be four things. We're going to answer the question, why, twice. Why do most states mandate that you spend 3 hours of your life every 2 years in an ethics course? We're then going to move it into the second why, which simply is, why does the public lean negative when they hear the word insurance? Now, I'll ask that statement and you either agree or disagree. Would you agree with me here in the audience that when most people hear the word insurance, they lean negative rather than positive? Yes or no?
Yes.
Absolutely. And we're going to spend a little time on why people, when they hear that word insurance, why they do lean negative. And then we're going to solicit stories from you, the participant stories on ethics. And I'll tell you, that's a fantastic thing. And I brought one with me about what happened in a state on ethics, and we're going to speak to that as well. And finally, we can conclude the first hour with the definition of what you believe good ethics to be. I believe it rests on a foundation of three things with a whole bunch of talking points, but we'll see what you bring to the table. Hour two, then, will consist of three items. We're going to move into suitability. How important is that today with compliance? So we're going to spend time on defining what suitability is, and then I have a 15-step process on suitability which will keep you safe when you're dealing with the consumer. We're then going to move into what I call the imperfect storm. I'll ask the audience now, what demographic do you think gets taken advantage of the most?
Elderly.
Absolutely, seniors. And we're going to talk about that. And there's really two groups, seniors and what we call vulnerable adults. And we're going to speak to that. And then I'm going to give you three examples on what we need to look for and how we should take care of them. But there is something with them called the imperfect storm when we blend the elderly with an unethical agent. And then we'll have a number of other talking points. And finally, the third hour will consist all of case studies. We've got a good half a dozen to a dozen case studies that we're going to share today. And we'll have some fun. What we're going to do is do some individual work on those case studies, some small group discussion, and then we'll bring it to large group discussion as well. Know that the success of this class certainly is to have audience interaction. What's really cool about this is when you can draw from hundreds and, depending upon how many people you have in room, thousands of years of experience, it makes this class invaluable. And it's one of the reasons why people prefer a live session of ethics rather than doing it online. Before you know it, the 3 hours will fly by, people will have fun, and they will have learned something as well. So, with that, let's get into it. We'll answer the first question, why. Why do you believe the commissioner mandates that you spend 3 hours of your life every 2 years in an ethics class? Now take your time on this because we're here for 3 hours.
Because they've been tasked with protecting the public.
That's excellent, John. And I love the way you said it. Now, some of you have seen me present before and know that my writing's absolutely pathetic, so what I'm going to do is ink it up here and then I'll repeat it a couple, 3 times. But because the commissioner's office, and really the question then is why, and for lack of every state's a little different, commerce departments, commissioners of insurance, I'll just put why. Why does the state mandate? All right? So we've got the state mandate here, and John offers up simply, because they're tasked to protect the consumer. Is that what you said, John? Okay. Outstanding. What else?
They don't trust us.
Well, I don't know if you all heard that, but the issue of trust. And it's interesting because you could look at the broader picture and really think about that. Maybe the states want what we call national uniformity. Almost every state now has continuing education. Almost every state requires ethics, but they want it as national uniformity. Another reason, if you look at the broader picture, might be maybe because of the complaints that are coming in, the state wants to protect themselves. Now, I don't know if the commissioner's office, the Commerce Department, whatever your state calls it, could ever be sued. And if they're sued, if they could ever lose. But just maybe they can prove to the consumers now that, look, we mandated an ethics class. And we expect our agents who are selling in our state to make sure that they take the ethics class. So a couple reasons in a broader picture, national uniformity, and maybe just for their own protection. Any other reasons that you may have? All right, fair enough. Let me go through my list. We talked national uniformity, and again we talked about protecting the state. Here we have the protect the consumer, which is excellent. Maybe there's a trust level from regulators down to the agents because they've gotten consumer complaints, which leads me to number 3 on my list, consumer complaints. In other words, it's an effort then to protect the consumer as well as the industry. To improve trust. John talks about trust over here, to improve trust, but between who? The state and the agent, or the agent and the client? It's a gray area. My question later on will be, what is ethics to you? Diane, would you agree with me that what might be right for you might not be right for me?
I would hope not, but maybe.
Okay. Do you think, Tara, it is perhaps individualized, what you believe good ethics to be?
To some degree, I think it is.
It's a gray area. That's what some people say. Now, Diane, perhaps because of the way you answer that, you don't believe it is. Maybe you believe it's black and white. And I'm inclined to agree maybe that it is. But is it? And if it is black and white, who wrote the book? Very interesting here. So here's what we have as we move in is it's a gray area. So what is ethics? What really is ethics? All right. Let me give you a couple other reasons or thoughts why maybe this is mandated. To remind us of our responsibility in the field. To make us think, to refocus, just to regroup us every 2 years for 3 hours and just make us think. And then it would be worth it. A couple other reasons that I've heard is to weed out the inactive agents, which is interesting as you begin to study continuing ed in the States. How many agents that were inactive but carrying a license chose not to renew it because of the CE requirement. And maybe still another reason is just unethical agents, just to get rid of some unethical agents, which is interesting. I'm not sure this course can make anyone that's listening more ethical. I believe you either have it or you don't. I believe you're either grounded or you're not. But if I can make you think for 3 hours, then we've accomplished something. Now, let's go to the second why question. And that is, why does the public lean negative when they hear the word insurance? And in a general context, everywhere I go in the country, that is the consensus. And I say in a general context, there's always your other pockets and your codicils and things like that. But why then does the public, when they hear the word insurance, lean negative? Anybody?
They don't understand it.
Yeah, absolutely. So now again, I'm going to abbreviate everything and then I'll repeat it a couple, 3 times. US stands for understand, but they don't understand it. Now, think about that for a second. That's partly on us, isn't it, as an agent, to make sure that they do understand it. And I remember bringing this up one time in a class, and I had someone bring up, which was awesome, because I'd never heard it before. I said, well, what about the consumers who choose to do it online? Or on a toll-free number, and they don't have the benefit of the agent, and you're just calling for a quote, and the person on the other end of the line isn't asking for all the facts, doesn't know their full situation, and now they don't truly understand it. So I believe in a face-to-face with the client, we can handle part of this by making sure they understand it before they purchase it. But perhaps if they're doing it online, if you will, or they're doing it on a toll-free number without an agent, okay, that perhaps that understanding or lack thereof really comes into play. What else? What else? Why are some other reasons why the public leans negative when they hear the word insurance?
It's tied to a negative event.
Yeah, absolutely. With one exception, Diane, you're spot on with that. I hope you all heard it. Tied into a negative event. Can't wait to collect on my life insurance. Imagine that. Imagine those individuals that own disability income. Can't wait. Looking forward to collecting on my long-term care insurance. Oh, my house burned down. Can't wait to get that payment, you know. So you're right, but for one exception. And that exception is cash value life insurance. You could argue annuities, which is a life insurance product. Okay? But if we're keeping it with risk management, and some are now building annuities into risk management, with an income, putting it on a settlement option with an income that you can't outlive. But exclusive of annuities, you have cash value life insurance. And if you don't die, you can use that cash value to supplement, and I'll repeat, supplement your retirement years. Never designed alone as a retirement plan, but could be used to supplement your retirement years. Fascinating then, that every time a claim is paid through insurance, a negative event must happen, but for that one I just mentioned, cash value life insurance, using it to supplement retirement. That's excellent. What else? What are some other reasons why the public leans negative in a general context?
Because it's being sold to them.
Sold rather than bought. Sold rather than bought, and for sure, for the property and casualty agents, they will say that auto insurance is probably bought. Homeowners insurance, unless they're paying for it in cash, the bank's going to make them. So that's more of a mandate, isn't it, John? Okay? Life insurance. I've got a story to share with you, but here, let me just capture this. Sold rather than bought. Okay? I'll just put versus bought. So I remember I started in 1979, and there was a guaranteed insurability option that we used to have on these contracts. And I remember when I was trained, it just add it. Ask them, but then add it. In 3 years, you're going to be set, because all these guaranteed insurability riders are going to kick in, and they're going to be calling you, and you got it made. So 1982 comes around. I'm 3 years into the business, and I remember I sit back and I kick my feet up on the desk, and I'm just relaxing, just waiting for that phone to ring. So I'm going to ask all of you in the room here. Guess how many times that phone rang?
Never.
It didn't, which speaks volumes to what you just said. Life insurance, for the most part, is sold. It's not bought. Other lines oftentimes can be purchased, but it is sold, and then it becomes a negative connotation to the consumer. You're trying to sell me something. That's excellent. Any others?
People talk a lot about commissions sometimes.
Yeah, you bet.
That someone is
First-year commission. Yeah, absolutely. What else? Let me just start going through my list right here. Again, just to repeat what's up here, certainly that the question then, again, general context, why does the public lean negative when they hear the word insurance? Most people, or a lot of people, don't understand it. And that's, while I believe we can control some of that, some of it we cannot, and that's unfortunate. A negative event has to happen in most cases before a claim is paid. Agreed. It's sold rather than bought, with few exceptions. And then obviously first-year commissions. Here's a couple more. The media. Media leans negative. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Can't hear you.
yes.
Absolutely, the media leans negative. Now think about it in this term. Dog bites man. Doesn't make front page news. Man bites dog, right on the front page. All right. Cost. Cost is another reason. They're paying lots of money in premiums, and you always hear that a lot of people are insurance poor. They may not be, but that's their perception. Let me give you a couple others. Bad experience. Bad experience. And you know what? Normally when the bad experience comes, it's at claim time. Shame on us. It's a promise, isn't it? Insurance is a promise. And people pay lots of money in premiums for that promise. The last thing that they want to have happen at claim time is to be hassled. Two words right now that I hope you walk out of this room with. In every touch you have with a client is that you keep it hassle-free. Every touch, not just at claim time. But then what happens at claim time? Maybe it's not timely. Maybe their claim isn't covered. What happens when they do have a claim? Maybe they're canceled. Premiums go up. So, bad experience. It's an intangible. Diane, you sort of spoke to that here. It's tied into a negative event, but what is it? It's an intangible. It goes back to that word, that promise. People paying premiums, lots of premiums for that promise. It's a necessary evil. John talks about first-year commissions. Let me give you another one. Big home offices. All these home offices are giant. That money's not coming back to us. They got all these big home offices. Couple others. It's a ripoff. This is what I've heard around the country. Absolutely amazing. It's a ripoff. I'm going to speak to that in a minute. Insurance agents are crooks. There's turnover of agents. So we become an orphan. There's inexperienced agents. They're in and they're out of the business. Company failures. Interesting. And yet you don't hear that often, but when you do hear one, it goes back to the first one I shared with you. The media sure runs with it. I want to speak to the ripoff. I want to talk specifically to replacement. In almost every state, and obviously you want to be checking with your state laws, a replacement in and of itself is not against the law. But if you do it wrong, it is. And there's two things out there called churning and twisting. I'll start with churning first. Churning would be an agent who starts, let's say, with a company A, and they're there for 4 years. And after 4 years, they go over to company B, and they replace all that business. And notice what I said, all. Not some, all of it, over to company B. They're with company B for 2 years, and they think, you know what, I really thought this was the one, but it's not, so they go over to company C. And they replace all that business that they took from A over to B, now over to company C. And they're there for 3 years, and they go over to company D, and I think you can see a pattern here. and that's called churning. Think of it as you're just turning. Now, oftentimes, and especially if we're talking life insurance, John, you would agree with me that oftentimes it's the consumer who may lose on that deal, correct? Mm-hmm. Who wins?
The agent.
Absolutely. Getting a higher or a new first-year commission. Churning in almost every state, as I know it, and I won't speak to every state because I don't know every state's laws. I do know a lot of them, but churning oftentimes is against the law. The second one is called twisting, and what that is replacement through misrepresentation. Now, if I were to define what a misrepresentation was in 2 words, it's a false statement. So, and watch this here. Twisting the truth. And that's why they give it that name. You're replacing insurance through misrepresentation. You're simply twisting the truth. And that leaves a real bad taste in the consumer's mouth, certainly against the law in most states. Churning, twisting. Okay? And that's where you hear the word ripoff. John, I'm going to ask you to come up for a second. I'm going to role play with you here on one other one here. And then when we're finished here, we're going to be getting into some case studies. John, I want you to face me. Okay? Why don't you point your finger at me? I mean, like pointed at me. Okay, now, may I touch your wrist? Okay, thank you. How many fingers are pointing back at him?
None.
No.
How many fingers are pointing back at him?
Oh, 4. 5. Wait, 4.
I once had someone say 7. And I'm thinking, well, how can that be? And the only thing I can think of is I had my hand like this. So they counted my 4 and his 3 pointing back. So now point it at me again. Now one more time. And John, how many fingers are pointing back at you? 3. Good. Thanks for doing that. It speaks to my last point on this. Why did the publicly negative slander? Agents talking poorly about other agents and agents talking poorly about other companies. When you point your finger at someone else, 3 are pointing back at you. Don't do it. All right. Let's get into some stories. All one has to do is look around and you'll see ethical stories. They're all over. You can pick up the newspaper, you listen to the radio, you can watch TV. All the ethical stories are everywhere. And so now is when you want to begin to solicit from the audience. So are there any ethical stories here that would like to be shared? Excuse me. Oh, come on, all of you in this room, you don't have at least an ethical story to share, for crying out loud? I'll tell you what, I brought one here, but it's your session. I'd rather hear your stories first. Anyone?
Any mechanic story.
All right, I'm going to share mine. Hopefully it'll get us started. Okay? And then hopefully you'll come up with one. The success of these classes are based on the participation of the audience as it pertains to stories and things like that. So, all right. I should probably cover up the newspaper here. I'm going to read just a little bit. This is absolutely fascinating. Major metropolitan area in America. Goes back a couple years now. Front page, training, a study in cheating state law. This is absolutely fascinating. So let me read just a little bit. A group of insurance agents gathered at a hotel last October for some CE, a routine part of the trade, but there was nothing routine about this class. The instructor told them to cheat, copy each other's work according to an undercover investigator. The pupils falsified attendance sheets, then they paid $90 each and picked up the certificates that are essential to keeping their licenses. Getting credit for 15 hours of CE had taken 59 minutes. Unfortunately for the instructor, one of the students was an undercover investigator for this particular state's Department of Insurance. It wasn't bending the rules, it was blowing them away, he told Commerce investigators according to their report. How could I do it, or why did I do it? Because I didn't know you were in the room. Fascinating. Now, there are 6 companies mentioned in this. I'm not going to name any of them. I will leave this simply on the table here for any of you in the audience that want to check it out. While it is public, I wouldn't want any company to think that I'm defaming them. Know this, you've heard of all 6 companies. You think that's right? Diane, you think that's right to stay in a room for 59 minutes and get 15 hours of CE?
Of course not.
Of course not. Tara?
Absolutely not.
John? Andy?
No.
Hundreds and hundreds of agents have been doing this. I was told this particular day there were 300 agents in a room. Fascinating. Now I won't belabor the whole story with you, but I will give you the end of it. What's happened, and then I'm going to ask for your feedback on what should happen to a certain group that was in the room. First of all, the company was a provider. So let me try and put that in perspective. When you do CE, you normally have a provider. As I understand this session, NAIFA is putting the program in a box together, but as you take this out to your states and to your locals, you're going to be either using your state or your local or another source as the provider. There's a particular company here, one of the 6 that was a provider. They can still do business in a state as an insurance company. They can no longer be a provider. They're done. The instructor lost his insurance license, paid $90,000 in fines, and they almost put him in prison. They stopped short of doing that. And the agents, what the particular state said is, look, what's done is done in these past bienniums. But in his current biennium, we're going to go after the agents. And the agents that were in that current biennium said, now wait a second. If you don't go after everyone, then we're going to file a class action lawsuit. And this particular state immediately dropped what they were going to do with the agents. So my question then to those of you in the audience here is, what do you think should happen to those agents? And let me be clear. The going rate for live CE is about $10 per credit hour. Now, when you commit to some of these providers that you're going to do all 24 with them, they give you a little discount. But generally speaking, it's about $10 per credit hour. So a 15-hour day, and I've trained 14 hours before in a day to 2 different audiences, 7 hours, and then driving in 7 hours. That's a brutal day. Think about a 15-hour CE day once. That would be, say, starting at 7 a.m. and going to 10 o'clock at night with no lunch, no dinner breaks. You'd have working lunches, working dinners, and you take your 5 or 10-minute breaks in every hour. So it's a long day. But what basically was said here is they sign their name in, let's say it's 7 a.m. And I don't know that it was 7 a.m., but let's assume it was. 7 a.m., they sign their name in. 59 minutes later, they're walking out the door and they sign their name saying they were there for all 15 hours. And by the way, they paid $90. Now, for live CE, that would be a deal. In a general context, that would be a deal. If it's $10 per credit hour and they're getting 15 hours, which would be $150, they're paying $90. Okay? So they're thinking, okay, we're getting a good deal. We're only here an hour. We're getting filed for 15. Okay? So what do you think should happen to the agents? Anyone?
I don't want to say anything too serious.
Speak freely. And then I'm gonna and I will share with you the things I've heard as I've traveled around the country. Because in this particular state, I do CE, and at some point as a presenter, I might be asked by the state, Rob, what would you do? Now, every agent that's listening to this knows, guilty by association. What did we just talk about prior? Why does the public lean negative? Let's go back to this newspaper just for a second. This is front page. I'm just covering up what state it came from.
Yeah.
Okay? This is front page stuff. You want to know why the public leans negative? In fact, my buddy got this hundreds of miles away, got this, and then emailed it to me and said, looks like your business is going to pick up in this state. This is fascinating. So I'm just curious, and speak freely. What do you believe? The question is then, what do you, if you were on a task force for the state and they said, well, you're consumers, what do you think should happen to the agents? What would you say?
Well, actually, what I'm thinking is like baseball players in recent years where the union finally came around to supporting testing for performance-enhancing drugs. They actually got tired of playing against those guys and stiffened it up with suspensions.
Okay, so are you suggesting a suspension of a license?
Sure.
Okay. Now, give me an idea of how long you'd suspend it for, if you were asked. And I think this is a great thought, but how long? What does that mean to you?
The CE was for 1 year.
The 15 hours in this particular state, and the rules have changed, and I want to be careful now because I'll give away the state, but suffice to say they were there and picking up equivalent of 1 year of CE.
Okay, suspend for 1 year.
I was thinking months or...
Okay, how many months?
3 months.
Okay, so 3 months to a year.
I was thinking for the time period that it was supposed to be allotted for.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think for most agents, if you suspend for a year, they're probably out of the business. And that's fine. They just eliminated themselves by signing their name on something that they shouldn't have. Anyone else? What should happen?
I think they should actually have to take the 15 hours.
Right.
Okay, retake 15 hours. Okay?
If they do that, it removes the 1 year.
Okay. Retake 15 hours versus suspension.
Right.
Okay? All right, anyone else?
Have a fine.
Ooh, okay. What would you find them?
Service.
What would you find them? Oh, that's come up. Community service, okay? So we've got community service. What would the fine be?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I guess people do different lines of business, and do you want to kind of set it to something that fits their business? What they sell, I guess.
Give me a dollar amount. What I'm going to put up here is to fit the line that they're offering. I get it. We're all in the insurance business, so I'm going to put to fit the line, which could maybe speak to the profitability of what they're selling. But give me a number. Give me a dollar number, John. You offer up fine. What do you think the fine should be?
A couple $1,000.
Okay. Anyone else? Punishment for the agents?
If they retake the 15 hours, they have to pay the $90 again.
Well, they probably wouldn't be taking it from that presenter again. We know they're not taking it from the provider again, so it's probably going to be $150, if you will, or maybe they'll go online. And believe me, we built that in, as I talked about that churning a little earlier. That's a case study, but we're going to talk a little bit about online CE and those individuals who choose to get 12 hours of online CE and get done in an hour, which the states allow. But some states are cracking down on some of this stuff. And time permitting, as we get into the third hour, we'll have some fun with that. And I'm aware that there are some agents thinking there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. They mandate it. And if I can do it in an hour, do 12 hours of CE in an hour, fine. And I would simply challenge and say, what'd you learn? Because most people who can rip through 12 hours of material in an hour already know the subject material. So in the spirit of continuing education, what did they learn? And I would propose this. Would you want your doctor having a requirement of 12 hours of continuing ed on some new equipment or a new procedure? In Hawaii, signing in, touring the state, and I know this is done, by the way, and then coming back and signing out, never doing it, would you want your doctor operating on you next with that procedure? Diane?
Heck no.
Of course not. Of course not. And there it is in the spirit of CE. It doesn't have to be a negative thing. And earlier when we talked about why does a state or why does publicly negative, and you talked about perhaps having to buy, it's a mandate, you've got to buy some insurance and things like that. Perhaps a lot of agents look at CE as negative because it's a state mandate. It doesn't have to be negative. Take classes that are of interest to you and learn something. Okay, I'm going to ask one last time. Are there any others? We'll suspend the agent's license. The thought is anywhere between 3 months and a year. Retake the 15 hours. Okay, and in so doing, maybe then we release the suspension. An agent that would be smart at that point would immediately take it, so there is no suspension, right? They'd get that done, Andy, within a week or so, or sooner. A fine, and maybe to fit the line that you're selling, but maybe up to $2,000. Community service. Any others? Let me give you some that I've heard. Fines are up there anywhere between $500 and $10,000. And the persons who've offered up $10,000 said, look, they're clearly breaking the law, make it hurt. Retake ethics. Okay, now I see the 15 hours up there, retake ethics, and they say, in fact, all 15 hours should be on ethics. Okay, fascinating. Some would say sit for the pre-licensing again. Classes again, and retake the test, obviously with a successful pass to get your license. Suspension I've heard 3 to 6 months, a year to 2 years, 5 years. I think I know the industry well enough to know that if you're suspending someone's license for maybe even 6 months or more, perhaps they'll be out of the business. And in fact, that may be the intent of the suspension at that point in time. Got a couple others for you. List their name publicly.
Al.
Same newspaper, maybe in the inside. Now, who knows? Maybe there'd be some stuff open for libel on that, but could you imagine that on the inside, having every name that was in there? These agents broke the law. Now, let me be clear. I'm just reiterating what I've heard other agents in America say ought to happen to those agents. Let me give you a couple others very quickly. Rent a billboard and put their pictures on it.
Oh.
Require a designation within a certain time frame. Andy, you spoke to if they retake the 15 hours, it eliminates the suspension. Some are saying, hey, you've got to get an insurance designation in the line that you're offering. And then at that point, you do it within a certain time frame, you're good to go. The thought was let every home office know. In other words, every company that these agents represent, the home offices should know that these agents were in that room doing it. And then certainly, John, you offered up community service and that as well. I've heard anywhere from the 15 hours that they forged, if you will, up to 100 of community service. I'm saving one for last, and no one's brought it up, but it's the one I get the most from around America, is immediate revocation of a license, which is interesting. And remember now how this was all positioned. They signed in saying they were there, and they were, but they put their name on something signing out saying they were there for 15 hours and they weren't. I don't know what you call that, but that's fraud. And I come from the school, and no one's asked my opinion, so I'm not going to share it. But I come from the school of CE doesn't put money in your pockets, it's continuing education. Now, I would assure you if we were doing a program in a box on Social Security, anyone that would be watching that would walk out of that room and they'd have ideas to make money. Ethics, I don't believe, makes anybody money. But if we can regroup you for that 3 hours and make you think, then we've accomplished our goal. And so, therefore, think of it in these terms and follow the logic on this. If someone's willing to put their name on a line saying they were there but they weren't for something that doesn't make them money, what are they willing to do when it does make them money, i.e. on an application? Thanks for sharing with the stories. Now we're going to talk a little bit about ethics. All right? You know, traditionally, in every session I get, when we talk ethics, I ask for ethical stories, and every story I get leans negative. I don't say, give me negative ethical stories, and I don't say, give me positive ethical stories. Just give me ethical stories, and almost everyone I get, almost everyone, leans negative. So I used to start the session this way. Ethics is. And then one time, someone in the audience said, Robin, we just talked about ethical stories. Everyone you got was negative. So maybe what we ought to define is what good ethics is. I agree. So, anybody, speak freely of this. What do you think good ethics is?
Do unto others.
Okay. And what's that called?
The golden rule.
Yeah, the golden rule. Do unto others. The golden rule. Excellent. We're on the board. Who can recite the whole golden rule? Quickly.
Do unto others as others do unto you.
Do unto
You want others to do.
Do unto others as you want others to do unto you, but what happens if the way you want to be done unto is not how they want to be done unto? So someone, and I think, and I hope I get this right since we're being on tape here, I think it's Dr. Tony Alessandro. He writes a book this thick on the platinum rule. Who's heard of the platinum rule in this room? Yeah, fascinating. How do you write a book this thick on the platinum rule, which is one statement, which is?
Do unto others as they want done unto them.
Do unto others as they want to be done unto. And so I'm addressing the Wisconsin funeral directors one time. Now let me ask you this. Could funeral directors take advantage of you in that moment of truth? Yes or no?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, absolutely they could. So they have ethics requirements as well. And I'm addressing it. One time I put out, someone says the golden rule, and I said, okay. And I answered it just as I did here with Andy. And then we come back and we talk about the platinum rule. I said, maybe doctors got this nailed. Huh? Do unto others as they want to be done unto. And a funeral director raises his hand and says, what happens if they're asking you to do something illegal? Up goes the platinum rule. All right? But we're on the board. So good. What else? What else is good ethics?
Character, they talk, it's what you know, well, what you do when others aren't looking.
Ooh.
It's the definition of
That is what character is.
Yeah.
What do you do, okay, character. What do you do when no one else is looking? Or, what do you do when you don't think anyone else is looking? There's almost nowhere you can go today without being on camera. And if you don't believe me, take a look around. In the rooms that you sit in, the little casino bubbles, stop and go lights, traffic lights, if you will. You'll see cameras, cell phones, computers. I'm told in London that a person is on camera an average of 300 times a day. Fascinating. Character. What do you do? And that's a great talking point. Character. What do you do when you don't think no one else is looking? When no one's looking, or when you don't think no one else is looking? Interesting. Very good. What else?
Knowing right from wrong.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. The difference between right versus wrong. Now, I was just looking over to the side. Was that you, Diane, or was that you, Tara? Tara, excellent. How do you define right? And if you say opposite of left, you're out of here. Okay? How do you define, in your mind, when you said that, what were you thinking when you said that? Difference between right and wrong. Knowing right from wrong. Okay? In your mind, you know what's right and what's wrong, correct?
Correct.
Might you agree that what might be right for John might be different than your right? Maybe?
Maybe.
Okay? So how do you define right? How does Tara define right?
Question.
When I see it.
Yeah, I guess. Right. This is sort of an intangible. You just know.
Whatever doesn't get you in trouble.
Well, there are certain rules of law, or
All right. So now we keep going. All right. So there's rules. There's laws. Okay.
Conventions.
What'd you say?
Ethical conventions.
Well, but we don't know what ethics is yet.
Okay.
But what do you mean when you say conventions?
Just practices.
Okay. All right. All right. Fair enough. Rules, laws. All right. Practices. I get it.
community norms.
Okay. Norms. Interesting the way you position that, and you used community norms. Okay.
Certain ones could be applied to one group of people that wouldn't apply to another
That's correct.
because of religious background or ethical background.
Correct,
Or
which-
ethnicity background.
Which now speaks what?
To the more subjective elements of
That maybe it's not black and white.
right.
That it's why we're here in the room, because it is gray. I don't know the answer to that question. It's the one I can't answer. If it's black and white, should it be? If it is black and white, who wrote the book? Okay? And believe me, that could take us for hours trying to define that. What I will not do is get into all the philosophy today on ethics. Okay? But yeah, community norms based on a lot of stuff. Okay? Based on religion, based on race, ethnicity, etc. You bet. Good. Now, I'm going to stop right here. And Tara, I still want you thinking about this, okay? And then I'm going to ask the rest of the group if we're on board with something. I think we are. I believe good ethics rests on a foundation of three things. I believe we have a whole bunch of talking points of which character is one of them, okay? Because all you said was character. You could be a character, or you could have great character, right? Three things. I think one of them's up there. Let me ask the audience, because it's your session, and we'll see if we're on board with it. Do you think it's important to abide by rules of a company? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. Do you think it's important to abide by rules of your state as it relates to insurance CE? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Do you think in a general context it's important to abide by the laws of society? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. So I think we're on board then with at least one of those three as a foundation. I once had someone say, well, what happens if it's a bad law? Well, guess what? If we didn't have laws, there'd be anarchy on the streets. Would you agree with that statement?
Yes.
Sure. So now we have rules, laws, practices, if you will. You could take it a step further. You could say guidelines. The reason why I didn't have it up there, but you could use it. Oftentimes rules are set in concrete, if you will. Laws are set in concrete, where guidelines, if you can almost picture like a railroad track, huh? And the guidelines, GL, if you will, guidelines, are these here. And they allow you to play in between. I hope that makes sense. All right? But the rule overriding or the law, etc. So I think then good ethics, for sure, one of the foundation points is abiding by laws, rules, and guidelines. Good. What else is it? And Tara, I'm coming back to you for a second. Right. You know. I know you know. But what does it mean to you?
I guess it's sort of like a moral judgment.
Okay. That's it. Now we're on board. Moral judgment. And ladies and gentlemen, if you believe morals has anything to do with good ethics, we now walk out of here with our own individual definition of it. I used to try and get every audience, everyone in the audience on the same page. And if we had 30 people in a room, we'd have 29 ready to go. I mean, they're all on board. There's one back there and ready to take a break. And just as we're ready to take a break, that hand goes up. Well, you know, and I learned a long time ago that it's near impossible to get everybody on the same set of what you believe good ethics to be if you believe morals are a part of ethics or good ethics, because everyone has a different set of morals. You'd agree with that, Diane, wouldn't you?
Yes.
We get that from where? Our upbringing, don't we? And everyone's had a different upbringing. I look in this room, and I would say in a general context, we all had a similar upbringing. Specifically, it was different. So, morals, great talking point. And I understand now your definition, okay? You believe right. I know it based on my morals, okay? And I get it. All right, good. What else? What else is good ethics? I'm going to flip the page here in a second, but what else is it? Remember now, it rests on a foundation of three things. We've got one of them up there with a whole bunch of talking points. Let me offer one up. Character. John, have you ever heard the word integrity? You think that's important?
Yes.
What does it mean to you?
It's an honesty, truthfulness.
Okay. Integrity. Honesty. I want you to think about this. Can I be honest with you but not tell you the whole truth? And before you answer, I want you to think about it. I already know the way you're answering, and I think that's the right answer, by the way. But let me read this. Integrity. Guess what? Merriam-Webster's dictionary, online dictionary. And yes, I did go on the online dictionary. All right? This goes back a couple years. Absolutely fascinating. 10 most requested words. The 10 most sought after words in Merriam-Webster's online dictionary a handful of years ago. I'll start with 10, move forward. Inept, levy, conclave, pandemic, tsunami, insipid, filibuster, contempt, refugee. Integrity was the number one, the most sought after word in Merriam-Webster's online dictionary. Here's how they define it. Firm adherence to a code. Especially moral. There's that word, Tara. Or artistic values. Integrity. Firm adherence to a code. And I think that's what Andy was talking about when he used conventions, correct? I think that was how you said that. Firm adherence to a code, especially moral artistic values. And here's one other word they offer. Incorruptibility. Incorruptibility. Integrity. Incorruptibility. Black's Law Dictionary. Here's how they define ethics. Of or relating to moral action, conduct, motive, or character. Of or relating to moral action. There's that word moral again. Okay? So now it's surfacing in a couple things. Important words, integrity, as it pertains to good ethics. I don't think anyone disagrees with that, all right, depending upon how you define it, but they use the word moral in there. Then we look at Black's Law Dictionary. How do they define ethics? Of or relating to moral action. Interesting. I'm going to come back to that word motive in a bit. John brings up the word honesty. Let's talk a little bit about honesty, John, and I asked you this question, so now we'll come to the answer. Can I be honest with you but not tell you the whole truth?
Yes.
Absolutely. If any of you have any teenage children or have had teenage children, you know exactly what I'm talking about. All right? So, absolutely fascinating here. Honesty. Is there a better way of saying honesty?
Truthfulness.
And by the way, for those of you that are facilitating, make sure right now you share personal stories about that honesty when you were a teenager. Truthfulness. Okay, truthful. I can be truthful. Andy asked me this question. Robin, can I get my money out of an annuity?
Robin, can I get my money out of an annuity?
Yes. Truthful answer. It's an honest answer.
Detail it.
Didn't give everything you'd want to know, did I, Andy?
Not the full story.
Yes. So what's that called? What's a better way of saying honesty? What's a better way of saying truthfulness? You all know it. And you had half the word. You had one of the two words. Didn't give the full story. So
Full disclosure.
perfect. Full disclosure. Let's talk about full disclosure here. You see the difference? Let me ask that again. Do you see the difference?
Yes.
There is a difference between honesty and full disclosure. Let me define it for you. Okay? Giving your client everything they need to know and make an informed decision. I'll repeat that. Giving your client everything they need to know to make an informed decision. You know what attorneys like to use? Robin, did you give your client everything material to them making an informed decision? Or did you omit some material facts? They love that word, material. So your definition of full disclosure simply is giving your client everything they need to know to make an informed decision. Back to you, Andy. Ask me that question again. Robin, can I get my money out of my annuity?
Robin, can I get my money out of my annuity?
Absolutely, Andy, you sure can. However, you're under 59.5, so there's going to be a 10% penalty. And oh, by the way, we have a 9-year surrender charge, and you happen to be in year 5, so there's going to be a surrender charge. And I think you all see where I'm going with this. Big difference between being honest and fully disclosing, giving your client everything they need to know to make an informed decision. Let me ask you this. Do you think then full disclosure is a better way of defining good ethics rather than honesty? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Second one. Second piece to the puzzle. Very good. So now we've got 2 of them so far. Good ethics is abiding by laws, if you will, rules, guidelines, okay? And full disclosure, and we've defined that for you. All right, what else is it?
Taking into consideration someone else.
Oh, very good. And by the way, let me just offer this up, and John, let me capture that. Okay, you're considering someone else. Okay. For those of you doing securities in the room, listening. Okay, prospectus. Have a lot of fun with this one. I haven't had a securities representative in America read, in the interest of full disclosure to their client, the prospectus. Not one has ever said, I've read it for my client. So where does full disclosure end with the prospectus? You simply hand it to them, because most aren't reading it. Okay? Most aren't. There may be an exception listening. So, if they're not reading it, okay, let me ask you this. Everyone listening knows that in a prospectus there are some pages that are more important than the other. So I'll ask them, well, do you take a yellow marker out? Let's pretend this one were yellow. And do you make some highlights? And I'll just put the word yellow. You'll know what I'm talking about. Do you highlight? And they'll say, well, absolutely not. Why? Against the law. Okay? Bad idea. That was a bad example. So forget the yellow marker. How about a pen on that page 13 of that prospectus? We know they're going to forget some things after you leave. That's the important stuff. So maybe you just take your pen and put a couple little asterisks by a couple paragraphs. So when you leave, they know what's important. Do you do that? Of course not. Any particular reason? You bet. It's against the law. So they can't mark it up with the pen. Now, some of you are old enough to know in this room, probably not you, Tara, to know what a dog ear is. Okay? Do you know what a dog ear is?
When you fold the...
Good for you. Okay, good. So, all right, yeah, maybe we ought to dog ear that page. Okay? That's an important one. I'm going to leave pretty soon, and that's the one you can't do that. That's how sterile, ladies and gentlemen, of a document the prospectus is. So this is interesting. So where does full disclosure start, and where does it end with the prospectus? And most agents will say, either my company sends it to them, or I hand it to them. Now, if you hand it to them, hopefully you get proof that you've handed it to them. If the company sends it to you, how do you know they ever got it? Prove it. Prove it here. Company sends. Did they ever receive it? When things go well, everyone's happy. When things don't go so well, they want to find someone to blame. How do you know they really got that prospectus as it relates to full disclosure? And then John talks a little bit about considering someone else. So let's talk about that a little bit. Who should we have the best interest of? Client? Everyone agrees with that, huh? On board. Client first. All right. Let me be clear. In almost every state that's listening to this, you got to check with your state law because it could be a little different. The state I'm from, if you say you're an agent, you represent the company first, not your client. Interesting. Now I want to be clear, you've heard it, I'm going to repeat what I said. A broker represents the applicant. And when I say broker, I'm not talking stockbroker, I'm talking about someone who can write with a lot more than one company. An agent represents the company first, by law, in the state where I'm from, which is Wisconsin. And I am aware of other states that have that same law. You want to check with your law. So now, watch how this works. So now, while I get it, most people say, look, what is good ethics? It's considering the other person client first. I don't think there's any disagreement. But if you are an agent, by law, at least in some states, you represent the company first. Interesting how this is playing out. So now we're going to role play. And John, I'm going to work with you a little bit. And let's just pretend you're an agent. And I've asked you to put together 2 plans for me. We'll keep it simple. We'll make it an annuity. And I've asked you to put together 2 plans with 2 different companies. So company 1, company 2. And so what you've done is put the proposals together for me, and you presented them to me, and they look pretty much identical. But each company has the identical claims paying ability. There are about 4, 5, 6, 7 different claims rating services out there. They're identical. In the end, to me, when I'm going to begin taking this money on an income, a lifetime income that I cannot outlive, we'd be splitting hairs to say there's really a big difference. Okay? So they're pretty similar to me. Company 1 pays you more than company 2. Which one do you sell me?
If they're truly the same, in every way, company 2.
Company 1 pays you more than company 2.
Company 1.
Okay, that's what I thought. I thought that's what you meant. Just wanted to get that clear. Yeah, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with getting paid for what you do? Here's my point. Did you hear what I said and the way we positioned it? Simply as this, and this is very important we understand this. Claims paying ability is identical. And you have multiple companies, there are many companies out there, right, that where claims paying ability is identical. And in the end, the difference to me would be negligible. I asked him to put together 2 plans, and he did. One of those companies just happens to pay him more. Why would he sell me the one that pays less? So he sells me the one that pays more. Now, I'll speak to that in just a minute. So some would say agent. Notice I won't say first. Client first. If you define yourself as an agent, you represent the company first by most laws in the states. Agent. Some would then argue that all parties need to be considered. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. Now, I think we have it now. I think we've got our 3, okay? I don't think anyone disagrees client first, but all parties need to be considered. Now, I want to come back to this here because this is very profound. As I understand laws around our states yet, you still do not have to disclose commissions. However, I have seen this, and I don't talk about this a lot, but when we get into suitability, I will. There are things there that I've learned as being an expert witness on ethics in some cases that I think can really help keep you, protect you in arbitration. If it gets to the court, protect you there. But it's absolutely fascinating here is we don't have to disclose commissions. But remember what we talk about. When things go well, everybody's happy. When things don't go so well, they want to find someone to blame. So, John, we're just going to role play here a little bit now. And I'm going to be the attorney, and I'm going to be the plaintiff attorney. Okay? Here we go. John, as I understand, and remember now, you're the agent. John, as I understand, my client, Robin, asked you to put together 2 proposals for him. Did you do that?
Yes.
And my understanding from my client is in the end, they both had identical claims paying ability. Is that correct?
Yes.
And in the end, on a life-only settlement option, he seemed to be pretty much the same to him. Is that also correct?
Yes.
Okay. Between Company 1 and Company 2, we understand that Company 1 paid more commission to you. Is that correct?
Yes.
Did you sell him Company 1?
Yes.
Can't hear you.
Yes.
Would you repeat that one more time?
Yes.
Thank you. If it's a jury trial, and you already know that the general population leans negative when they hear the word insurance, you can sort of see where that one's heading. Here's the protection. Disclose your commission. I know you don't have to do it. I'm aware in most states you probably still don't have to do it. It may happen someday. But imagine if John said to me in your original purchase, Robin, I'm coming back to you, and some agents will defer it. They won't make the decision. I have had agents in the country in this role play say, I won't sell you. And I said, then I'm going to walk next door and buy it. That's fine. They wouldn't sell it. I don't think that's the right solution either. I think the perfect solution is to say, John, if we go back to role playing and say, look, they're pretty much identical. Okay, but I want you to know that Company 1 pays me more than Company 2. And if the client trusts you, they don't care. If they like you, they don't care. But now you've disclosed it. Now the management of Company 1 makes some bad decisions, and I lose money, and I come back to you to sue you, and in a court of law, that attorney would already have known that I disclosed it. You see what I'm saying? Now you're protected. Does that make sense? Okay, very, very important there. But what does that say then? What does it go back to? Full disclosure. You don't have to do it. But in that situation, Barring anything unforeseen down the road, it might help you, where you actually disclose your first year commission, and now you're safe on that. So now we look at this, and I'm going to have some more talking points that I'm going to share with you here. But as we end this foundation of three things, good ethics is abiding by the rules and the laws, practices, guidelines, etc. Full disclosure, we spent a lot of time on that, and client first, but certainly considering all parties. Any other things that you want to add to this? All right, I've got a couple more that I want to share with you, and I'll do it very, very quickly. A couple more talking points. We are going to speak to suitability in the next hour, but there are a couple, and one would be something I just want to bring up is intent. What is a person's intent? Remember Black's Law Dictionary's definition? All relating to moral action, conduct, motive, or character. That word motive, I use the word intent, same thing. Let me share a story out of Wisconsin, but because he won Dancing with the Stars, everybody knows who I'm talking about now. Donald Driver. Starting NFL wide receiver. Certainly probably out here, you don't hear as much about his childhood as we did in Wisconsin. He was a bad kid and admits it now, and is probably trying to make up, doing a lot for charities and things like that. But as he was growing up, he actually lived in a U-Haul trailer. That was his house. Imagine that. Imagine the peer pressure he had from kids. Where do you live? I'm over there. There's no home over there. I live there. I live in that trailer. Imagine the hunger he felt. I look around this room, and there isn't one of us in this room that ever felt those hunger pains. So he goes into a grocery store, and I'm just going to share one example. Looks around, grabs a loaf of bread, and hits the door. You're the owner. You make chase. Now we're talking the genes of a future starting NFL wide receiver. Probably not going to catch him. And if you did, if you know the Donald Driver thing, he'd probably drag you about 15 feet. By that time, you let go because it's just not worth the loaf of bread anymore. Okay? Now I'm going to ask you a couple questions. Stealing, illegal?
Yes.
Unethical?
Yes.
Absolutely. Okay? Intent. Put it over here. And now I'm going to take you to Madison, Wisconsin on Halloween night, Saturday, October 31st. State Street, UW-Madison. Football game just ended. Badgers won. Okay? We hear a lot about this in Wisconsin. Perhaps out east you don't. Kids having a little bit too much to drink, taking some rocks, throwing them through store windows, breaking in, stealing things. Illegal?
Yes.
Unethical?
Yes.
Of course it is. Intent. Intent's the same word. Might have two different meanings. And as you put together your definition of what you believe good ethics to be, I think that word intent should resonate. What's a person's intent? What's their motive? Last one. Innocent error. An innocent error. Diane, if you were to make an innocent error, what would you do?
Try to rectify it.
Okay, and how would you do that?
Well, it would depend on what it was, but, I mean, just make it right.
Okay. You wouldn't try and cover it up?
No.
Okay. I didn't hear that.
No.
Okay. How come?
It's not right.
It's not right. Okay. Would you cover it up there? You made an innocent error? It was innocent. It wasn't an intentional error. Okay. So it was innocent. Simple mistake. You wouldn't try and cover it up?
No.
How about you, John?
No.
Okay. Andy?
No.
Nor would I. As I travel the country, I haven't had anyone say, yeah, I'd cover it up. So why do so many people cover up their errors? And you know what? It's never the innocent error that gets one in trouble, is it?
Cover up.
It's the cover-up. So, in conclusion, good ethics. With a whole bunch of talking points, I think you're on solid footing with the three rules, laws, abiding by those. Full disclosure, keeping your client first, perhaps considering all parties. All right, just as a couple last thoughts on our discussion here on good ethics, I just want to run by a couple questions for you to consider and certainly participate in. Just because you have the right to do something, does it mean it's the right thing to do? Yes or no? Let me repeat. Just because you have the right to do something, does it mean it's the right thing to do?
doesn't necessarily mean it's
It
right.
does not
Correct.
necessarily mean it.
Correct. And I will tell you that, and I probably didn't enunciate that first time properly. Enron's the classic example. It's an old example, but it is the classic one. The top 5 executives certainly had the right to plead the Fifth Amendment. Every employee and shareholder probably didn't think it was the right thing to do. Does ethics change from generation to generation? Yes or no?
Probably does.
I would hope not the fundamental tenets.
Good, Diane. Good. You thought through that before you answered it. Generally speaking, when I ask that question, does ethics change from generation to generation without any thought? Most people will say absolutely. And I'll say, does it? Or is it, does ethics change? Or is it what society accepts that changes? Which is interesting, because if ethics is black and white, and I don't know that it is, but if it is, then it should never change. But if it's black and white, who wrote the book on it? Do laws change? Yes. And if laws are a foundation of good ethics, then maybe ethics does move, which is interesting, because now you're taking one of the pillars, one of the foundations, and laws do change, don't they? Now you're taking that and it changes. But generally speaking, it's what society accepts. So we're going to role play here real quick. Now, Terry, you can catch this on TV land, because I clearly know you're not old enough to know what the little sitcom I'm talking about. But the rest of us, yeah, you bet. So we're going to go back to the 60s, a black and white sitcom. We're going to fast forward to a reality show in the 90s. Admittedly, I'm comparing an apple to an orange, and I understand that, but that's okay. You'll get it. So we're going to go back to the Dick Van Dyke Show. Okay? Dick Van Dyke Show. Here we go. Just answer my questions. Bedroom scene. So we're in the bedroom. How many beds?
2.
2 beds. Absolutely. What's in between the beds?
A table.
Yeah, it's a nightstand. What are they wearing?
Pajamas.
Pajamas. Triple flannel. You rarely see them embrace. And as they begin to embrace, what does the network break to?
Commercial.
You got it. Now we're going to fast forward to the 90s. Reality show. Never watched it. Didn't need to. Heard enough about it. The Osbournes. Okay? And if you know what I'm talking about, the rocker Ozzy Osbourne, let me tell you, those kids, they're pretty messed up there. Okay? So imagine that concept of that reality show taken to the major networks in the 60s. They'd have been thrown out. And it just brings my point. Is it, in fact, ethics that really changes? Or is it what society accepts? Let me give you one last one. Is it right when it's convenient to be right? Is it right when it's convenient to be right? And I want you to think about that. I'm going to give you an example. I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, so now I want you to think about that. Home of Harley Davidson. Admittedly, I've never seen a Harley rider do this, but I've seen other motorcyclists do this. Everyone in this room has seen the bumper sticker on a vehicle. Motorcyclists have equal rights. I'm sure you've seen it. Would anyone disagree with that, by the way? Of course you wouldn't. Motorcyclists have equal rights until they're in a traffic jam. And then what do some cyclists do?
Wait through traffic.
Sure they do, and that's the dangerous one. Some, and I'm aware in some states that are listening to this that it's legal to do, but some will hop a shoulder. Okay? Some will go in between. It's the weaving that's extremely dangerous. So let me make sure I got this right. And I'm only giving you one example. Okay? Is it right when it's convenient to be right? Okay? So the motorcyclists want equal rights all the time until they're in a traffic jam, and instead of abiding by all the rules that everyone else has to, they choose to be convenient about it and hop a shoulder or weave in between. So just a couple extra points to think about as you present your definition of ethics. That's it. All right, so this concludes hour one on answering those 2 questions. Why? Why your state mandates that you spend 3 hours of your life every 2 years in an ethics class. Why the public in a general context leans negative when they hear the word insurance. Certainly the solicitation of ethical stories and our definition of good ethics. Hour 2 then, we'll move into defining what suitability is and giving you the 15 steps of it, as well as getting into what I call the imperfect storm and some other talking points.